Hi, Deb Tucker here. I'm going to talk to you today about my Quilter's Magic Wand. You would not believe how many times we're asked, what is a magic wand and what do I do with it? What you see in front of you here are samples of the 9 different colors of magic wands that we currently produce. Each of the magic wands, it's a very simple tool. It is 1/2 inch wide. It is 12 inches long, and running directly down the middle of each of the magic wands is an etched line. So it's going to give me an exact 1/4 inch on either side of that, of the edges of the tool. Now, what I would like to talk to you about are some of the ways that I use the magic wand. You may already be familiar with it, but some of these you might not have thought about before in the past. One of the simplest ways to use the Quilter's Magic Wand is to mark the lines that I use when I'm making half square triangles. When I'm making half square triangles, I'm taking 2 squares, putting them right sides together, and then I'm going to take my Quilter's Magic Wand, position it on top of, I generally put it on top of the lightest square, and position it so that that lasered line is directly on the corners of the square that I've cut. And then I'm going to mark on either side. Those marked lines will actually be my stitching lines. Now, since we're talking about marking, let me give you just some of my favorite marking tools. One of my all-time favorite marking tools is just a regular old number 2 pencil. I like to have one that has a click so that the lead stays nice and fine the entire time. Probably the tool that I use more than any of the others is the Pigment Pen. It is very, very fine, and the nice thing, the pencil will sometimes leave a little drag when I'm marking. The Pigment Pen will mark very smoothly without any drag, and it's completely waterproof. It never will fade or run or bleed into any of your projects when they get wet, which quilts will tend to do when you go to wash them. And a new product on the market is a Bowen marking pencil. It also it's click, so it shoots out a nice fine lead, but the nice thing about the Bowen marking pencils and their system is that they create leads in different colors so that you're going to be able to pick the lead that works best for you, and it's a nice way to mark your pieces. Now, since I've got my favorite one here, I'm going to pick up my Pigment Pen to do my marking, and I'm actually going to mark on the 2 squares that I've got laid on the mat. They're right sides together. Lasered line is at the point. Mark on one side, raise my hand up, take the marker, mark on the other. You see how quick and easy that is? It gives me a nice fine line. Those lines that I've marked actually become my stitching lines, so that when I go to stitch on the 2 lines that I've marked, and I cut them apart and open them up, sure shooting, I've got my half square triangles, quick and easy, no problem there. Now I can take those same half square triangles and use those to create hourglass units as well. To create the hourglass units, I'll take the 2-piece half square triangles that I've already pressed, layer them one on top of the other, so that the yellow is on the peach and the peach is on the yellow. They're opposite. And then go back to my magic wand. Again, position it in the corners so that the lasered line is hitting directly in the corners of the piece that's on top. Take my favorite marker, mark those 2 lines nice and clear. I've got easy visual lines to sew on when I go to sew, and when I sew and cut them apart, I'm going to have my pieced half square triangles. I'll also use the magic wand when I create my combination units. Now, the combination units are those units that consist of 2 1/4 square triangles and a half square triangle. To make them, I simply make my half square triangles, lay them on top of an unpieced square, come with my magic wand again, positioning it so that the lasered line is in the corners of the piece square that's on top. And take my marker, mark first on one side, mark on the other. Those become my sewing lines. When I've stitched on those lines and cut down the middle, I'll have 1 combination unit here, and I will have 1 combination unit on this side. So those are some of the primary ways that I use my magic wand. I also use the magic wand when I do my fast flying geese technique. For the fast flying geese technique, I always work with a set of 5. I work with 1 large square and I work with 4 small squares. I take each of the small squares, use my magic wand, and simply mark the diagonals on either side. Take the first 2 squares, put them on top of the large square, do the stitching on the lines that I've marked, and then once I do that stitching, I have pieces that look like this, cut them apart, take those pieces, press them like this, take my additional small square that's already been marked with the magic wand and the lines, stitch here, you're going to see that I'll have my flying geese units. One on this side, and when I fold it back, I'll have one on this side. Those are some of my primary uses for the magic wand. One of the other units that I make on a somewhat regular basis is called little houses. And to make little houses, what I do is I start with squares. I start with a big square and I start with 2 small squares. Now, to be able to make little houses, it's a little bit different than the other squares that I've done up to this point. On the other marking, what I would do is stitch on lines that were 1/4 of an inch on either side of the center. With my little houses, I actually need a stitching line that's going to be right on the center diagonal. That's the line that I need to stitch on to be able to create my little house unit. But then I'll also mark other side of the tool, and that becomes something that I can use to give me use for the cutaways. When I make my little houses, I've already got 1 square positioned on there. The stitching is on the diagonal. The stitching is also on the cutaway edge. I would take the next one, position it in the corner, do my stitching right on that center diagonal, but if I stitch on that cutaway side, that cutaway line, what will happen is when I've stitched and I've cut and I've folded those out, I am going to end up with 2 little cutaway squares that I can then trim down. I'd use my Tucker trimmer to do that, but I can trim those down and use those in some future project, or donate them to somebody else who might like to use them in one of their projects. But my little houses are what I use to create all of the border, or most of the border, and all of the stars in the quilt that you see behind me. It's a fun little unit to play with. We have more information on it in another video. You can take a look at it there. The same idea, the folded corner idea, is frequently seen when you make a snowball unit. A snowball unit, you have a big square, you have 4 little squares that are going to go into the corners. You are going to actually need to stitch on the center diagonal. So if you mark that center diagonal and then also mark the diagonal that is a 1/2 inch away and stitch, you'll be able to cut those pieces away and use those little squares as well. I think you probably understand what I'm talking about here with the snowball. One of the other things that I do with my magic wand is I use it when I'm doing precision piecing. One of the things we introduced just a few short weeks ago is a technique sheet, and the technique sheet is for Migrating Geese. This technique sheet will help me to make this great. Well, you can actually see it in the border of the quilt that's behind me. But the Migrating Geese is a precision piecing technique, which means there's no wiggle room built into this construction of the rows of pieces. So I use the magic wand to actually help me with the construction. When I go to put the next piece on my section the starter that I've already done, and I flip it over, one of the corners lines up pretty easily, and that's great, no problem there. But at the other end of that, there's no real easy alignment. So what I'll do is I'll take my magic wand, and I'm going to use it and actually mark my future 1/4 of an inch seams. So I'd mark here, I'd mark a little X right here, I would turn the piece and do my marking of where my future seams are going to be. So that when I go to stitch then, I'll line up this corner so that it's nice and square, but to make sure I'm hitting the right marks, I'll put a pin directly through the X that I marked on the front and putting the pin directly through the X that's on the bottom. Line those up, and when I stitch through those pieces now, what that will do is it will give me rows of migrating geese that are very straight. It will give me migrating geese that have points at every intersection because I've taken the time to use my magic wand and to mark the future 1/4 of an inch seams. All I have to do is make sure to hit them with my stitching, and everything stays exactly where I want it to go. So the Migrating Geese, it's a great fun technique. If you've never tried it, you may want to check out our technique sheet. Lastly, one of the things that I do with my magic wand, it gives me an opportunity to check my blocks to see how well I've done. This is it's a fun little version of my country fair. It's a smaller downsized version, but I can use my magic wand and I can put the laser line up against the bottom of the square to see how my piecing is. Do I need to go back? Do I need to do a little reconfiguring or restitching to make it be nice and square and even? By checking with my magic wand, I see that that point is actually just a little bit shy of my 1/4 of an inch. So by putting a pin in there, knowing that that's a little shy, I know that what I can do is make a small adjustment when I'm constructing the quilt, and I'm going to be able to keep that point. Now, one of the things that you should never, ever do with your quilter's magic wand is you should never, ever use it as a cutting ruler. It is strictly for marking. It is strictly for measuring. Please don't ever pull out your cutters in association with the quilter's magic wand. So please think about putting the magic wands into your life. Think about putting them in a couple of friends' hands. You can pick them up at your local quilt shop. You can pick them up at our website and add a little magic to your life.